All right, let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day. This is a day for some of us of sorrow because of a loved one who is gravely ill, but we trust you in your direction in all our lives, and we know that you know the month of our passing to that very day, it says in the book of Job. So we trust you in all the things you do, even though sometimes we can't understand them easily. And we pray about this tonight, the word that you wrote, that you inscribed, that you had Moses write down, a word that is divinely inspired and divinely designed. We pray that you would give us insight into it tonight, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Now, I got to tell you that I found a very interesting verse this week, and I have to read it to you because I think that it says a lot about the Word of God and about God Himself. It's in the book of Job. You don't have to turn to it, I'll read it to you. It's in the 26th chapter of Job. And I just ran upon it and I go, wow. So here, see if it hits you like it hit me. Verses 13 and 14. By His breath the heavens are cleared. His hand has pierced the fleeing serpent. You know who that is? The Nakash. Verse 14. Behold, these are the fringes of His ways, and how faint is a word we hear from Him, but His mighty thunder who can understand. In other words, even in our best efforts, as we study the best we can, we only understand the fringes of God's truth. But I pray at least we can plumb the fringes as we go into God's Word. So I love that verse. So we're in Deuteronomy chapter 3.
And it was Job what? Job?
It was Job 26, 13, and 14. So let's read the text we're going to cover tonight, and I'll explain to you why it's only 11 verses that we're going to cover, and I'll explain to you why we're not even going to get through all the material tonight concerning these verses, because there's a lot there when you unpack it. The problem, of course, that we have typically as we study is that we don't unpack it. Right. We read it on a surface level, you know, we kind of, that's interesting, and we see a word, we don't really know exactly what it means, we pass over it typically. We don't go into it, we don't look at it, we don't see the context of it, we don't see the geography of it, we don't tend to pay attention to these things like we should. But as we do, we can unpack stuff. So let's, Deuteronomy 3, I'll read the first 11 verses and then we'll go over them. Then we turned and went up the road to Bashan. And Og, the king of Bashan, with all his people, came out to meet us in the battle of Edrei. But the Lord said to me, don't fear him, for I've delivered him and all his people and his hand into your hand, and you shall do to him just as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon. That was the capital of Sihon's empire, the Amorites. Verse 3, so the Lord our God delivered Og, also king of Bashan, with all his people into our hand, and we smote them until no survivor was left. And we captured all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them, 60 cities, all in the region of Argob, the king of Og in Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many unwalled towns. And we utterly destroyed them, as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But all the animals and the spoil of the cities we took as our booty. Verse 8, thus we took the land at that time from the hand of the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, from the valley of Arnon to Mount Hermon. Verse 9, here's this interesting verse that's inserted. the Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. Now, I'm certain it makes perfect sense to you, but you might let me explain it to you in a little bit. So, okay? Verse 10, all the cities of the tableland, notice tableland here, okay? And all Gilead and all Bashan, as far as Selakah and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Raphaim. Behold, his bedstand was an iron bedstand. It is in Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits, and its width 4 cubits by ordinary cubit measure. Okay. Now, those are the verses. Now let's try to unpack them some. Now, I want you to notice the emphasis here is about this area called Bashan. Okay? And Bashan, I don't know if that map doesn't go high enough north. See if we have anything else there that we can turn to that shows Bashan. I think we do. Well, here, okay. You can see it. See, we go from the area of, here's the Argob, this almost border between these areas. Here's this place we're going to talk about in a minute. It's Ashtaroth Karnaim, Ashtaroth Karnaim. And of course, here's the battle area. And you'll notice that, and we'll show you, I'll talk about it in a minute, it's at the south end, basically, and about 30 miles east of the Sea of Galilee. Mm-hmm. Okay? And of course, if you go directly north up here and a little bit to the west, you have Mount Hermon. Mm-hmm. So it's this area from Hermon on the very west, down here, across here, and all the way up into what today we call northeast Syria. That's Bashan.
Mount Hermon, like red on top.
Yeah, up here. Sorry, a little bit north of where.
Is that the Golan Heights?
Yes, that is today. Well, it's part of what today we call the Golan Heights. All right? Now, so it extends, as I said, to the west from the base of Mount Hermon, to the east and the north, into, again, modern-day Syria. Edrei, where this battle really starts with Og's kingdom, as I said, is about 30 miles directly east of the south end of the Sea of, it was called in the Old Testament the Sea of Kinneroth, but in the New Testament the Sea of Galilee. It's the same thing, just a different name, Old Testament, New Testament. Now, Og, it says, was the last of the descendants of the Raphaim. And if you go back to Numbers 13, okay, verses 30 through 33, spies are sent into the land, 12 of them, 2 of them say, great, look at this land, it's unbelievable, look at the grape cluster, we had to carry it between 2 men on poles, let's go. And the 10 go, there were the giants there. And we look like grasshoppers in their sight, and they were scared to. And then it lists, and it says, of the Raphaim and the sons of Anak, and then it talks about these subgroups. So the Raphaim is kind of a more collective name, but there's all these subgroups of these giant peoples too, which we'll also talk about because they're in the text here, okay? So, of course, Og was a giant hybrid human being of some sort. And Og and his military and his nation were impeding the progress of Israel coming into the land where God promised them and told them that they were going to conquer. Therefore, because they were impeding it, they had to be gotten rid of. And not only did they have to be gotten rid of to clear the land, but remember, I've told you all along, there's 2 big things that Satan did, right? He occupied the territory that Israel was supposed to have with the Canaanites, and he created these giant peoples that he put in the land to terrorize Israel and of course set up his satanic strategy there. So it was a twofold thing. Now, Og's territory, if you look on a map, or as we've shown the map a little bit there, is approximately 3,000 square miles. It's a pretty good sized territory. Now, compared to Sion, who's down a little bit south of him, his territory was about 1,500 square miles. Still a pretty good chunk of land there. Now, in verses 3 and 4 in our text, in Deuteronomy 3, we see that Israel moved from the south, going north, and as they moved into this area through here, a lot of what they came in Gilead and through here, and even over to this side, was very nice, fairly level pasture land. Okay? And you're going to think about that in a minute, because as the text goes on, it's going to become important that it is pasture land. We'll see why. But there's this place called the Plateau of Argob.
Is it the same pasture on which one of the tribes wanted to occupy?
Right. It's the place that the 2.5 tribes wanted, and that even though initially Moses was not predisposed to grant it ultimately, because they promised that even if they were given that area for their flocks, the military men would come with them, cross the Jordan, and fight in Israel proper, and that's why it was allowed. Now, this region of the Argob is a very different thing from the pasture land around. This is again why we look at this. Well, the region of Argob. So what? Well, let me describe it to you. It's a basalt rock formation, black basalt rock. Okay, all right. At its base, it raises anywhere from 30 to 60 feet above the surrounding area, and it was on top of that many, not all, but many of the cities of Bashan, Og's cities, were built. Therefore, they were built, many of them, on a tall rock plateau. It also contains rifts and valleys, and of course, it was a very strategically held area. Now think about this. Naturally speaking, this would have been, for Israel, an absolutely enormous tactical operation to try to climb up in this area and have these tall, walled, fortified cities, which were mentioned here. That would have been very difficult to do. But an interesting thing happens, and that is, let's go back to verse 1, okay? Notice the last part. Og, king of Bashan, and all of his people came out to meet us in the battle of Edrei. Now, think about it. If you are on this basalt plateau with your cities, and you had big walled cities with iron bars and iron gates, do you think you'd want to come out of those cities and go down into the pasture land to meet Israel? Pardon?
They made a mistake.
Oh, I think they made more than a mistake. Yes. I think it was more than a mistake. The point is that Og's military left the cities to battle Israel on a pasture land, a flat pasture land. Now notice here, go back, or you don't even necessarily have to go back maybe, to the left in Deuteronomy 2, this phrase. It's a phrase that's gone all the way through in the Exodus and in their wanderings and the peoples they met. It will continue to go through as they conquer the land. It will continue to be reiterated when Joshua crosses the Jordan and takes all the cities there. Look at it, verse 25, I'll read it. This day I will begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the peoples everywhere under the heavens.
We talked about it.
In other words, I think Og was deceived by God, and that in his deception, just like Pharaoh, I believe, was deceived. Remember, Pharaoh says, let the people go after 10, and then turns right around and says, let's go kill them. Mm-hmm. Okay? In other words, he tried to put his death sentence on Israel, and God turned around and put a death sentence on his army by drowning in the Red Sea. Well, this is what has happened time and time again. So I think they had a diluting influence that occurred on Og, so that he decided to leave these fortress areas, which have been very difficult to overcome, and of course go into a plain where really probably Israel had the advantage in that situation. Okay?
So God had to interfere.
Yes.
Otherwise, they wouldn't, conquer giants.
It would have been very difficult.
But it says in 25, they shall hear the report of you. Can you summarize what's the report?
Well, the report is that obviously the word of the Exodus had spread widely. We know that in Joshua chapter 2, in the story of Rahab, okay, and Jericho, the spies are sent in, and when she finds them and hides them, what does she say to them? We've heard about what your God did to Pharaoh in Israel, killed his army, crossed the Red Sea, and the people fear you. God spread this information around so the people realized there's something going on here that is really dangerous with these people called Israel. Okay? Now turn to, if you want to, hold your place there, but turn to Joshua and go to chapter 24 at the very end. You should know this. We've studied the book of Joshua. And I want you to look at verse 12. Here's a reiteration.
24:12?
Yep. Then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove out the two kings of the Amorites. Who are we talking about? Sihon and Og, okay, from before you, but not by your sword or your bow. In other words, it was God strategically moving, creating fear, causing confusion, and all those things, and then he leads Israel into victory. Okay?
The horns drove out to the plain.
Well, and again, it's difficult to know for certain whether the hornet means specifically real hornets, or whether it's an analogy to God's pestering, and stinging them, as it were, like a hornet would, and driving them into an area.
I think it's real horns.
It could be.
I think it's horns. That would get anybody out of there.
Oh, it would.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, because later on he talks about the horns again here.
Yeah. Now it says that God gave the ability to Israel to overcome these walled cities, even though they had tall gates and tall walls and bars in their windows. And of course, part of the reason why when they go up finally into the Argob, they can do it is because where is Og's military at this point? Dead on the plains. Okay? So, yeah, exactly. I mean, they basically don't have much of any military left at that point to cover these cities. And so then they go into these cities. And of course, all the people found in the cities were, it says, karam, okay, in the Hebrew. Karam means under the ban of destruction. They were all to be killed. Now, we went through, last week we talked about the ethics of God in killing peoples, and we talked all about that. I'm not going to reiterate that. That's on last week's stuff. But at any rate, we know that there are many reasons why that they were all eliminated. Part of it was religious. Part of it was the absolute horrible, pornographic, wretched, child-killing nature of their religious worship. Part of it was there, of course, we knew there was Nephilim blood mixed with at least some of them. There's a lot of different reasons why. Now, verse 8 of chapter 3, it summarizes what's happened. And it summarizes the conquest of territory of Sihon and Og And again, from the base of Hermon to the east, all the way to the northeast of the Bashan territory. Now, we look at this little intercession or insertion in verse 9. And of course, let me read it again. The Sidonians called Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. Now, what that means is that they called it Mount Sirion, what we call Mount Hermon. And they also sometimes called it Mount Senir. Both refer to, or at their base, refer to the star Sirius in the heavens. Okay? Now, Sirion, the word Canaanite name, means to shine or glitter. Now, keep that in mind. And Hermon means to be devoted to. Literally, it means to be devoted to a pact of agreement. That's what the word means, to be devoted to a pact or agreement. It seems to strongly imply what is talked about in the book of Enoch, where Enoch tells us that 200 fallen angels came down to Mount Hermon, and they made a pact with each other that they would do this, not turn back, not abandon each other, and go ahead and do this nefarious job of creating the Nephilim. So it's a pretty strong allusion to that. Now, as I said, let's talk. I want to spend the rest of our time, and even the next time we get together, on this issue about, so what about Bashan? It's mentioned so many times here. What do we know about Bashan? What's said about Bashan? Are there any Bible verses about Bashan? Are there any archaeological issues that we can look at here that tell us about Bashan? Because you're going to see, and I won't get to it this week, you're going to see that there are at least 20 to 25 passages in the Old Testament about Bashan. And some of them are very provocative, and I'll get to them the next time, not this time. Now, first of all, Bashan is to its far west, as I showed you the territory, okay, to its far west it sits at the base of Mount Hermon. There is an area at the very base there that's called Banias, or sometimes also called Panias. Okay? Jesus, in the time of his life in Israel, during that time it was called Caesarea Philippi, named by the Romans. Okay? And this is where we have a notorious ancient grotto to the demigod Pan.
You talked about
Okay, I've talked about it before, if you remember. Now, this is a site of huge occultic activity where ancient priestesses would come out of the grotto, and they were mediums, they were occultic mediums, and they would give oracles to their devotees upon the proper worship. Okay? Now, this is the very spot where Jesus stood in Matthew chapter 16. And let's read it again, because I think,
we're talking about church.
yes, I think we dare not miss this, because Jesus didn't pick this spot for no reason at all.
So what's the verse?
It's Matthew chapter 16. So let's read it. It's important to put these things together, and we're going to start in verse 13 of Matthew 16. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he began asking his disciples, saying, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Well, some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed be you, Simon Bar-Jonah, son of Jonah, because, notice, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but rather my Father who is in heaven. Then verse 18, a verse that, the Roman Catholic Church completely misconstrues, okay, in their theology. And I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Okay? Rock.
Yeah.
Where is he looking at? He's looking at Banias. It's a rock ghetto. Cut out, big cave there, okay? The gates of hell. And that's what he says. In the gates of hell, that's what, you can virtually see him pointing at the grotto and saying, the gates of Hades, it's there, not hell actually, the gates of Hades shall not overpower it. And then look at 19. Thus I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And this is not, the grand vending machine in the celestial sky. Whatever I want, I'll do. The text is talking about dealing with the spiritual entities, the demonic, the demons. That's what's being discussed in this, okay, the occult activity. And then he says, verse 20, I'm sorry, let me end in 19. And whatever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So, Jesus gives authority here by pointing at the gates of Hades at the grotto of Banias and says, from now on, I will give you spiritual authority over them. Okay? This is the very western side of Bashan. So it starts out as being not a real nice place spiritually, does it? Okay? That's the west side. Now we'll move east. So, as we move east, we move up here. I don't know if we can show it here, or not very well. It's hard because there, but you're going to move east here, moving this way, you notice this becomes a very flat kind of pasture land area, the very southern part of what today is Syria, okay? And you move into this place, and you find a very interesting structure in this place that archaeologists have studied considerably. It's called Gilgal-Raphaim. Now, Gilgal-Raphaim, if you can show, there we go. And you want me to try to turn this here a little bit? You turn. I'll show you a picture. Now, this is a picture looking down from hundreds and hundreds of feet in the air. And you can't appreciate, because it's so high, the size of the stones. What you probably can appreciate is this thing in the middle. It's huge. Okay? And it's a huge dolmen, and I'll tell you about it in just a minute. Now, Gilgal-Raphaim is a rock system of 5 concentric circles, which is a megalith, and like almost every megalith, is a solar calendar. Therefore, it predicts the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the autumnal equinox, and the spring or vernal equinox, and even other things too. People have dated it at about 3000 BC. It is located 10 miles north of this town, which we're going to talk about in a minute, called Ashtaroth Karnaim. And I'm going to show you the significance of Ashtaroth Karnaim. In a minute, we'll turn to Genesis chapter 14, verses 4 and 5 and 6, and I'll show you some interesting things about it. There's another reference to Ashtaroth Karnaim, in that you'll find it in Joshua 12:4. And there's another reference to it also in 1 Chronicles 6, verse 71. So it's mentioned a number of different times. Now, in the very middle, as I pointed to you, of Gilgal-Raphaim, is a central large dolmen of stone, which has upon it a stone which is well over 20 tons, sitting horizontally on vertical stones. It's a capstone or tumulus, it's often called, which is 60 feet across. Now you should ask yourself a question at this point. That's the first question. And then there's a second question. How? How do you move something that's well over 20 tons?
Just to set that machine, you'd have to have a crane bed set, you know, just for the crane to set there.
Assuming you could do it with a crane. Okay. Okay. How do you move it from wherever it was located and get it there and set it on top of these vertical stones as something that's huge?
You have wings. Something's got wings. No. Levitated.
Exactly. I think the only conclusion you can come to, and again, if you read the book of Enoch, you talk about the fact that the fallen angels gave technology to people, and it looks like one of those technologies was that they could defy gravity and move things. And we see examples of this all over the world. You know, we find these tremendous monuments, Vespuccio, I think, isn't it? No, it isn't. It's
in Mexico.
No, it's in Peru.
Peru.
It's the top of Peru.
Right.
I forget the name, but you have these unbelievably sized stone walls that are inscribed and cut. You can't put a piece of can't put a piece of paper in between these seams with all of these stones fitted on them, and they're at and they're 10,000 feet above sea level on the top of a mountain. And they've recognized that the closest stone, which is, it's all granite, most of it's done in granite, quarry-wise that they could find, I think was a quarry around 65 to 100 miles away. So you have to explain, how can they move stones that big between 65 and 100 miles away to an elevation of 10,000 feet on top of a mountain?
And why?
And then inscribe them with laser accuracy.
That fourth dimension.
That's right. You know, we have example after example after example after example of megaliths all over the world that are like this. You know, there in Russia, and there is a huge block wall that was built there. It's monstrous. You know, you go to Turkey, you know, you look at some of the sites there, and you find these monstrous megalithic images which defy realistically any human capacity to ever build them. Well, this is like also Gilgal-Raphaim. Stonehenge, exactly. So notice that dolmens, and I don't think I gave you a picture of dolmens, but dolmens look like the mathematical figure pi, two sides and a top. That's a dolmen, okay? Now, dolmens are traditional burial sites that were shaped always in this way. They had two vertical sides and a capped top that was a large horizontal stone. Dolmens all over the world have been places of occult practice, places of burial of powerful chieftains, shamans, and others, you know, occult priests, etc. And associated with dolmens inevitably are malignant occultic powers. They have spiritual power to them in their sites. Okay? Now, it is alleged, though it is not proven, that Og was buried in the middle of Gilgal-Raphaim. Remember, verse 11, Deuteronomy 3, his bedstand is 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. He is a very big giant, and that dolmen is a very big place in the middle of Gilgal-Raphaim. Now, also in Bashan, in this territory, archaeologists have found at least 85,000 dolmens in Bashan. Now, the reason I'm trying to tell you all this information, I want you to get an idea how malignantly horrible Bashan is and was. and that's why I'm going to go into this. It's used as a word to describe the worst of the worst by God, okay? All through the Old Testament. Of these 85,000 dolmens, there found them to be of 20 distinct types or shapes. Some of the stones in these dolmens exceed 50 tons in weight. That's over 100,000 pounds. Again, how do you move something that's 50 tons, particularly in the ancient world?
I don't think anybody's ever given us an answer to that question.
No, they don't. They skip it. They can't. They don't have an answer. So or there's another vein of people that I understand why they think this, but obviously the Bible doesn't really agree with them. As they say, well, it's extraterrestrial technology. Okay. Well, I don't think it's extraterrestrial technology. I think it's demonic technology that does this, fallen angel technology. Now, as we said, Gilgal-Raphaim is built on a flat area. And I didn't give you a bigger picture here. We have one, but there's no hills around Gilgal-Raphaim. You can't get on a hill that's close enough to look down on it and see it. But the interesting thing about Gilgal-Raphaim is to understand its structure, you can only see it from the air. That's the only way you can understand it. Now, what are we told in Ephesians 2, verse 2? That Satan is the prince of the power of the air. Okay? Therefore, it's meant as a testament, as an effigy site. He's marking the ground. And I make this point when we did our series on the last hour about when we went to Serpent Mound. He's marking the ground. All of these effigy sites around the world are satanic and occultic, and they mark the ground. He's trying to mark his territory. Remember, this is a territory that he got the title deed of and stole through his deception of Adam and Eve, right? Temporarily. Until it's going to come, Christ is going to come as Messiah King and bring it and take it back from him. Until it's claimed by Messiah King. So, as I said, there are many effigy sites like this. If you try to really appreciate Serpent Mound in Adams County by just being on the ground, it's very difficult to do. If you fly a drone 500 or 600 feet in the air, it becomes very clear. Okay? But it's more difficult to understand from the ground. Now, let's go to, and I want you to turn here, let's turn to Genesis 14. Because I want to show you another example of something that we skip over. Now, I'm going to start in verse 4. We read these names and we read this and we go, well, that's nice. But I don't think we really understand what we're looking at here. So let me try to explain it to you. Verse 4. 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but the 13th year they rebelled. So some group of people had paid tribute. Serve means really to pay tribute to this king named Chedorlaomer. And then on the 13th year they said, no way, buddy, we're not doing this anymore. Verse 5. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and defeated who? The Raphaim in where? Ashtaroth Karnaim. 10 miles from that site, right there. And who did they defeat? The Zuman and the Amim and the Horites, verse 6, of Mount Senir, of Mount Hermon. Right. So here we see this map that I pulled. I think it's interesting. You have the territory of the Zanzuman, these giant tribes. You have the territory of the Amim. You have the territory in the coastal area here, which I talked about last week, of the Azim, which you end up with the Philistine giants eventually here. Okay? You have this bigger area in the middle of the Raphaim, and these are all these giant have these giant peoples in them. All the ites. Okay. Now it's interesting that Ashtaroth, the name, is Canaanite for the goddess of war, whose name was also in Canaanite called Sirius. Remember we talked about Sirius? The Queen's Chamber in the Giza Pyramids, the channel 2,300 years ago when the constellations were a little bit shifted, in the spring pointed directly at the star Sirius. And the light of the star came down the shaft into the Queen's Chamber. Okay? Sirius is a star that is connected to the demigods in astrology.
Okay, who she was again?
She was the Canaanite, quote, goddess of war. Okay? I know she was a demigod. Now, so...
Who was the one, the wife of the guy who built the Babylon Tower?
Oh, that's Nimrod's wife,
Yeah.
Semiramis, who some people think is also another name for Ashtaroth, too. Now, I want you to turn again to the book of Joshua, and I want you to go to chapter 12. And I want you to see what Joshua says about this. Verses 4 and 5. And the territory of Og, king of Bashan, one of the remnant of the Raphaim, who lived at Ashtaroth and at Edrei, and ruled over Mount Hermon and Salakah and all of this territory called Bashan, as far as the border of the Gershites, and he goes on, and also, of course, talks about the border with Sihon, king of Heshbon, which is the southern border. So again, this place, Ashtaroth, goes all the way back to Genesis 13, and it's connected with the giant peoples in a battle there. It goes on through Moses' day. It's 10 miles away from Gilgal Raphaim. And of course, it's a place that Joshua has to go also in his northern campaign in that area and get the giants out of that area too.
Is it Ashtaroth like a city in that Bashan area?
Yes, Ashtaroth is the name of the city. Now, Gilgal Raphaim is also called the Wheel of Raphaim. The word Rapha, remember, means the dead ones. Okay? It's also called the Wheel of Spirits, and it's also called the Wheel of Ghosts. Those terms are used interchangeably of it. Why? Because Rapha can also mean departed spirits, demons, quote, ghosts. They can show up as ghosts, obviously. These are all allusions, of course, to the word at its base, Rapha. Now, Gilgal Raphaim and the many dolmens of the Bashan area were considered to be portal tombs. Portal tombs. And places, of course, like the Tower of Babel, which was a portal on the top, okay, the gateway to heaven. And of course, what does Babylon mean? The gateway of the gods. In other words, we would call them the demigods. Okay? And these areas in Bashan were portal openings and sites of enormous demonic activity. Now, we have references also by other peoples, not just the Bible. We have texts that we found, writings of different peoples that have lived also in this Bashan area that talk also about this area too. So we have a documentation even by other cultures about what we read in the Bible here. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. In the ancient Ugaritic peoples, in their texts, talk about this area of beings called Rapayu, R-A-P-P-I-U. Of course, it's another Semitic language, and it's related to our word Rapha. Raphaim. Now, Raphayu, according to their texts, were beings who were travelers, who traveled through dimensional portals in and out of the spirit realm and back. That's their definition of who the Raphayu were. This is the Ugaritic texts. They were peoples that lived in this area. Like, we have ancient cultures like the Sumerians that are older than some of these others, and they have these texts. Some of them are called the Ugaritic texts. Now, it's interesting. The Hebrew word abar, A-B-A-R, means, if you look at it, to pass over, to pass through, to pass away, as in to die, okay, or to pass into the spiritual realm. I want you to see some text evidence of this in the Bible itself. Turn to the book of Job. Job has some fascinating information. I mean, that those guys are shown by God that is absolutely phenomenal. So I want you to go to Job chapter 18. Now, I'm going to read this to you, and I'm going to try to describe it to you after I read it to you, okay? I can't spend the whole time talking about it. It's a very interesting text. But it picks up in verse 5. Indeed, the light of the wicked goes out. Now, you should ask yourself as you read this text, who are the wicked? What are they like? Who's he talking about? And I think the text will show you, okay? The light in his tent is darkened, and his lamp goes out above him. His glorious stride is shortened, and his own scheme brings him down. For he is thrown into the net by his own feet, and he steps on the webbing. A snare seizes him by the heel, and a trap snaps shut on him. A noose for him is hidden in the ground, and a trap for him on the path. All around terrors frighten him, and harry him at every step. His strength is famished, and calamity is ready at his side. His skin is devoured by disease. The firstborn of death devours his limbs. He is torn from the security of, again, notice the second use of, his tent. And they march him before who? The King of Terrors. Now, are you getting the idea? Do you think this is a regular guy they're talking about here?
Sounds like Satan.
Well, it sounds like a being, okay, but not a human being, okay? Let me go on. There dwells in his tent nothing of his. Brimstone is scattered on his habitation. That should give you another idea that he's now been transferred into some place that's not the earth, right? Okay? Brimstone is scattered in his habitation. His roots are dried below, his branches cut off above. Memory of him perishes from the earth, and he has no name above. Again, another interesting description, verse 18. He is driven from light into darkness, and he's chased, and this is where the idea of the word abar comes in, or moved or transported, okay, from the inhabited world. He has no offspring or posterity among his people, nor any survivor where he has sojourned. Those in the west are appalled at his fate, and those in the east are seized with horror. Surely such are the dwelling of the wicked. This is the place of him who does not know God. So, it's an interesting description of who this wicked is, right? Bildad, who's saying this, one of Job's friends, speaks of the wicked. As we read further, we see it talks about the wicked ones, and it talks about them leaving their tent. Notice there's an allusion to this in the New Testament. Paul, in 2 Corinthians 5:1, says that when we leave this earthly tent that is ours and go to be with the Lord and get our new body, so you have to leave the old tent to get the new tent. Okay, the earthly or the heavenly tent. And of course it talks, as I said, about the land of brimstone. He's driven into the realms of darkness. He's chased from the inhabited world. He passes a bar from one world to another. So it's in the same idea of these texts, okay, about these spirit beings, these entities that are able to pass from one place to another. Turn also to Job 34. There's another interesting text here too. Job 34. And I want you to look at verses 19 to 22. He says, who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich above the poor, for they all are the work of his hands, or are they not all the work of his hands? In a moment they die, and at midnight people are shaken, and they abar, pass away, that Hebrew word. And the mighty are taken away without a hand. Again, the question is, who's the mighty he's talking about? For his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. There is no darkness or deep shadow where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. Now, the word there for mighty is the word, and it's very similar. It's aber. Okay, abber. Okay, that's how it's pronounced, abber. It means mighty ones. It can be used of men, mighty men, but it's frequently used of angels in the Hebrew, okay? And it's also frequently used of, quote, mighty princes. In other words, well, let me show you an example of where it's used. Turn from here to your right to the book of Ezekiel. I told you I was going to take you on a journey tonight, but I want you to see how the Bible defines itself, and the Bible explains itself. We just have to find it in it. That's all. So, Ezekiel 39, this is after this victory over this personage named Gog in the battle of Gog and Magog. And in chapter 39 of Ezekiel, and we're going to look at verses 19 to 22, he says, well, I'll start in 18, okay? 18 through 22. It says, you shall eat the flesh of the mighty men and drink the blood of the princes of the earth, as though they were rams or lambs or goats or bulls. And look at the last phrase, all of them fatlings of Bashan. Does that give you an indication what he means about them when he calls them the fatlings of Bashan? He is talking, the prophet is talking, and he's prophesying. He's prophesying about this event, this big battle that just occurred, okay? And he's talking about that they're going to have to, in verse 13 and 14, after this battle, they're going to have to bury all the dead and the weapons for 7 years. And he talks about all these events until he goes down to 18 and talks about these mighty men, and he equates them with the fatlings of Bashan. I suggest to you he's not talking exclusively about human beings there. He's talking about entities there. Now,
does yours say mighty men?
Well,
read verse 18 again, please.
You shall eat the flesh of the mighty man. That's the way it's translated. But it can be translated other ways. It can be translated mighty angels.
Well, this is sad because this ESV completely drops that out in confusion.
Yeah.
Like that.
But they're called the princes of the earth. Okay? In Daniel, do you remember any princes of the earth?
Mm-hmm. Where
There's
held him back.
two of them.
Right.
Held Michael back.
There's the prince of Greece.
Right. Yep.
Okay? There's a couple princes mentioned. They are the spiritual rulers over these countries, these nations. Okay? They're called mighty princes. So, the fatlings of Bashan. So Bashan is an area that is noted for two things in the Bible. One, it's a great pasture land. Number two, it's horrifically and horribly dominated by the demonic through all these Dulamans, through Gilgal-Raphaim, and all these other things that occur in Bashan. I think it's interesting when you think about it, when they go through and have these battles, and yet the 2.5 tribes say, we want the pasture lands, but what are they really not paying attention to by wanting this area?
The background there.
Yes, they're not paying attention to the malignant spiritual background of Bashan. Okay? And so, of course, they pretty quickly fall into idolatry as a result. So, I'm going to stop here. I think I've given you enough to think about tonight. But next time we're going to continue. And what I want to do is I want to go on and show you, again, some other things that other cultures have written about this area of Bashan that are in their histories. And then we're going to go and we're going to look at, I'm going to select a bunch of different verses in the Old Testament, in Amos, and Ezekiel, and the Psalms, that talk about Bashan. We're going to pull out what the Bible says about Bashan. And I think you'll be interested, hopefully, in how it describes in these verses elements of Bashan. Okay?
Go for it.
So, all right.
Tim,
Yes.
Deuteronomy 7:22. It says, but the Lord, your God, will give you over to you and throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. Wait a minute. Let's see, 22. I missed it.
This is where again?
Israel occupies that.
It's Deuteronomy?
Yeah, Deuteronomy
That's where they
7:22.
Okay, just a sec. Let me go there.
Just the wild beasts go too numerous for you.
Okay.
Don't look them over too quick.
Oh, it talks about the 7 nations that are there. Yeah. When the Lord your God shall deliver them before you, you shall defeat them. You shall utterly, again, haram, destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, and you shall know them show them no favor. Again.
It says, but wait, it says, you will stir them away before you, little by little. You may not make an end of them at once. Why? Because these wild beasts will grow too numerous for you.
I've used it. I need a new.
That's interesting translation. Which one are you using?
Z,
What?
ESV, everybody's standard version.
Okay, that's not really what mine says in 2. We're going to have to look at the actual language there. But notice also the admonition in verse 3, since you pointed that, furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to them, or your sons, or take their daughters. Why do you suppose he says that? Why do you intermarry with them?
Blood.
Because of the issue of blood. Remember? The only people left that were purebloods in Genesis 6 were Noah and his family. Okay? And there's some question whether Noah's daughter-in-laws were purebloods. That's speculation, but people have wondered about it.
They brought that culture back over with them.
They may have.
So you still have the Nephilim with you?
Exactly. It could explain why you have the Nephilim and their descendants, quote, and thereafter.
Yeah.
It may be that it was found in the daughters-in-law's bloodline still. We don't know that. People speculate it's possible, but at any rate. So we'll go on and we'll talk more about Bashan. I think it's interesting. I hope you find it interesting talking about Bashan because it has this enormous background, this enormous spiritual background to it that I think we just tend to miss it. Yeah, go ahead, Mikey.
Tim, do you have any idea when the structures were built? And I know that they're quite old.
We have estimates. The estimates, 3000 BC. Yep. And that's an interesting number to me because it's the same number that's been put on estimates of, by not all, but some archaeologists about how old Serpent Mound is. There's a lot of very interesting megaliths that are dated to around 3000 BC. With a lot of stuff that's 5,000 years old.
So So what happened historically 3000 BC?
I think Satan was working overtime trying to trick all the people.
I think that Satan was preparing the land.
No, historically, what happened? What was that period? What was happening? 3000.
Well, it was
Abraham was what date?
Abraham would have been around 2300 BC, so he's about 700 years after this. It's kind of the beginning of the Bronze Age, quote unquote. We call it historically. You know, there's a lot. I mean, to answer your question, you'd have to say what part of the world. I mean, it's hard to, you know.
So that was quite a while ago.
It was a long time ago, and yet look at what was built there, you know, and it was built strategically. You know, for instance, I said this before, but if you take, you know, this place called the Stonehenge of America, that is, of course, in Salem, New Hampshire, fascinating place. If you ever get a chance to go there, please go there. It's a megalithic calendar right there in Salem, New Hampshire. You stand in the middle of it, and if you look, if it happens to be June 21st, and you look to your, well, where you stand there, kind of to your right, I think it's, well, I can't swear to the place on the compass, but in a cutout on one of the big megaliths sticking out of the ground, the sun rises. If you take Google Earth and you take and run the line from the center of that megalith there through the cut in that megalithic stone and keep extending it on Google Earth as far as it will go, it goes right through the middle of Stonehenge of England. I mean, it's through the middle of the three center stones, that central. And if you turn it the other way and you go to December 21st and run it to the southwest and extend the line, you go to a fascinating place in America, which I'm going to have to talk about sometime, called Chaco Canyon, which is probably the biggest accumulation of occultic activity of the Native American peoples in all of North America. It's in New Mexico. It's in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. Yeah, and we've had the fun of being there once. We want to go back again. So, at any rate, so we will. Okay. So, Mikey, would you close us in a word of prayer?
Heavenly Father, this is a very difficult day
Yes.
for my church. It's been a very difficult day for myself.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to miss Steve very, very much.
Yes.
He has really been the center of all the activity in our church for about 5-6 years now, and he'll be missed by all. But my prayer tonight, really, Lord, is not about Steve so much, because he is with you now, Lord. And so you needed him home, but I know that every time you remove a person or a thing on this earth, you replace it.
Yes.
And my prayer tonight, Lord, is because our church is small and we have many, many people that are dedicated to you, Lord, in the church. Because our church, Lord, doesn't give anything but you. Our whole focus in FBC, Lord, is about you. And you know that, because there's nothing else that we have to give but you. So tonight, Lord, my prayer to you is, please give us another saint to help guide our small church and those that are within.
Mhm.
Many of us are up in age, Lord, and soon will be with you, just like Steve. But in the interim, Lord, when you get to a ripe old age, Lord, you need that guidance. You want to stay on the path. The
Mhm.
path is very narrow, Lord.
Yeah.
You purposely designed it that way. And Steve not only was the center line of that road here on earth, but also the two white lines on both sides of it. So, I just pray that you'll give us another person. We can't ever replace Steve, Lord, and you know that. But I know that you can send us another saint to help guide us from here on. So in your precious name, please don't delay in that replacement, Lord. We need that man desperately. So in your precious name, you have answered so many prayers in this small group, Lord. You have cured cancer, and I could go on, and you know what you've done here, Lord. You have listened to our prayer time and time and time again. And tonight, Lord, I just beg you that you will not tarry in the replacement of that great man. In your precious name, I give you all the glory.